Good morning to all the participants. So we will take up where we left last time. Last time we have seen these koshas, pancha koshas. Now we are going one step ahead to identify ourselves and see whether there is anything behind or beyond this aspect of the three bodies and the five koshas. Binaji, you can minimize your video. You can minimize your video. Your video is appear. Right. Okay. Fine. So we are now going one step ahead and trying to know if there is anything beyond these things, beyond these what we are calling as the three bodies and the five koshas which we have seen. And the shloka or the question and answer part of it takes us here, where it says Madiyam Shariram, Madiyah Pranaha, Madiyam Manascha, Madiya Buddhir, Madiyam Ajnanamiti Svenaiva Jnayate Tadyatha, Madiyatvena Jnatam, Kataka Kundala Gruhadikam, Swasmad Bhinnam Tatha, Panchakoshadikam, Swasmad Bhinnam, Madiyatvena Jnatam, Atmana Bhavati. Now, he is presenting a very beautiful illustration here that generally when we are referring to what we have or what we possess, we call that as belonging to me, like my bangles, my earrings, my houses, my property, my things. Now, when you are calling them as my or mine, the person who is saying that knows that they are not one with him and they are not integrated with him, but they are things outside, and then he identifies them as though they belong to him. But he is not that. He is not the bangles or the earrings or the property or the furniture, though he may call that as mine. So similarly, he says, this body is mine, these vital forces or vital energies or pranas are mine, this mind is mine, the buddhi is mine, and this is my intellect, and this is my knowledge, or this is my ignorance. All these things he refers to as though belonging to him. But what is to be known is that the person who is referring to all these things as mine has to understand that just like gold ornaments or properties or furniture may belong to him, but he is not those things. Similarly, one has to realize here that these bodies, these koshas, the mind and the intellect and the pranas, the vital energies, they are not exactly him. They belong to him, but they are not him. So even if one has the idea that the house ornaments and so on are one's own, they do not become the self, isn't it? They do not become him. Similarly, even though we may have this idea or this thinking that this is my body, my vital energies, my mind, my intellect, my knowledge, and so forth, the problem here has to be understood that with all this identification, he does not become those things. He does not become the body. The fact of the matter he is trying to very clearly bring forth here is that this false identification which we carry, In fact, the false identification, knowing very well also we carry. For example, we know that this house is not mine, or I am not this house. This house or this property does not exactly belong to me. In the sense, this is not something which is a part of me. This is an acquisition. This is something which we have acquired and creating a kind of a false identification. Creating this kind of false identification. Now, when it can very much happen to objective things, objects which we are able to see are outside ourselves, we are stuck in that state of mind thinking that all these things belong to me or are something which are very, very close to me. But we know as a matter of fact that they are not me. But are we totally rid of that identification? That's a very important question, because unless we dissociate ourselves with all external objects as though they belong to us, going further and saying that I am not this body, I am not this mind, I am not this intellect and all becomes a much more difficult job. It becomes a much more difficult job for identification. Because when a person is very closely identifying himself with the objects themselves, how can you ask him to get rid of this notion that he is not the body? But there is a process of analysis and understanding by which we can come to this conclusion. Just a minute, please. We can come to this conclusion that I am not the body. Or maybe we can put it in a much better way and say, I am not the body alone. Right? I am not only the body. We would all agree that I am not purely and only the body. Then we come to the next level. Are we our own emotions, feelings, thoughts? We are not that. Or we are not wholly that. So neither we are wholly the body, nor we are wholly the thoughts, emotions, feelings, and so on. And similarly, I am not this mind also. So one can identify oneself with the body or the mind or the intellect or the thoughts and emotions and so on only at a certain level. But if somebody is trying to question the whole thing deeply, if we question ourselves very deeply, we will come to the understanding that no, I am not the body alone. I am not the thoughts alone. I am not the mind alone. I am not this intellect alone. I am not the knowledge which I have acquired. I am not any of these things. A combination of all these things also do not make it me. We also understand that there should be something beyond all these things. There should be something beyond all these things. That means this identification is a major problem with us. Why we are unable to connect to our core, why we are unable to connect to something which by definition should be changeless, is because of this continued false identification with several things. At one level, we feel that I am the body. At another level, I feel that I am the mind, I am the thoughts, I am the feelings, I am the desires. At another level, I think I am not this discrimination faculty also. And at another level, one can come to the understanding that I am not all the knowledge which I have acquired. So there is something beyond all these things that has to come through contemplation, and it is not a one-time affair. Fundamentally, at the first level, if we understand that I am not all of these things, it will give a certain level of clarity. But this clarity does not stay with us. At a crucial point, I identify myself with my thoughts, my feelings, my emotions, my attachments, my body, my house, my property. So, constantly bearing in mind that all these forms of identification are false, this notion of falsity of all the things with which I am identifying will not get firmly established in the consciousness. In one's own consciousness, at the background, it should always be there that I am not this body. I am not these vital energies flowing through me. I am not this mind associated with thoughts and feelings and emotions and desires and so on. And I am also not this faculty of intellect, or what I call as the faculty of discrimination. So all my experiences, all my knowledge, all my memory, all these things put together is not me. Is not me at all. So that has to be constantly held in the background of one's own mind and consciousness. Otherwise, what happens is any kind of inattention will fall back into the familiar groove of identification. So giving up this identification is something which is very, very important. Let us not identify ourselves with anything. That's where the stotra of Adi Shankara, when he says that Nirvana Shatkam, that's where he begins. He says, Mano buddhya hankara chittani naha. I'm not the manasa, I'm not the buddhi, I'm not the hankara, I'm not the chitta. I'm not any of these things. I am something beyond this. I am Chidananda Swarupaha. I am Chidananda Rupa. I am pure consciousness and pure bliss. I am in that state. So that identification comes about when you leave this false identification. The identification with external things, things which are acquired and which get attached to me. That is what is important here. Jiddu Krishnamurti, there's a small pamphlet, there's a small write-up also on that, where he puts a very interesting question and says, can you live like a guest in your own home? Suppose I go to some friend's place. I am very conscious of the fact that this is not my place. It doesn't belong to me. And I am only a guest. I don't have the freedom of just walking into any room, into his bedroom or his kitchen or wherever. I can't just move about in that manner. Now, Jiddu Krishnamurti says, can you do that with your own home? Sitting in your own home, which may technically belong to you because you have a document showing that it belongs to you. But that is not belonging. That is not actually possessing. That's only a legal possession or legal, authorization to possess something. Because this false identification, if we do not get rid of it when we are alive, it will continue to haunt us even after our death. It will continue to haunt us even after our death. because we are identifying ourselves. We're continuously identifying ourselves with everything. So we are going on acquiring, going on attaching things to ourselves. So that is what he is trying to highlight in here and say that all these things, this identification with the bodies and koshas and the mind and so on and so forth, it does not become the Atman. All these things cannot be the Atman. Atma nabhavati. There is a knower. There is a knower sitting inside these bodies and these koshas and this whole process which is going on, who is able to witness these things, and due to his ignorance and his inattention, is going on identifying himself with all these things. This is a very important factor because you can substantially reduce your anxiety, your disturbance, your conflict, your continued, state of mind which is always churning. We're restless. What happens is, once you say that all these external objects are not mine, or they are only for my convenience and use, and I need not be so closely attached to these things, then lot of the disturbance, conflict, anxiety, all those things will come down substantially. Will substantially reduce. Now, if something is happening in our neighbor's house, unless it is too disturbing, we may come to know that something is happening, there is some disturbance, but do we get involved in that? Or do we get identified with that? Do we try to interfere in that process? No. That can be done with oneself also. With oneself also. Because this is the conditioning. This is the conditioning in which we are stuck. The whatever state of being that is there of the mind at a given point of time is conditioned and identified with that state prevailing in the mind. But then that is changing. After some time, the mind is shifting to something else. The thought process is shifting, the emotions are shifting, the feelings are kind of constantly changing. Desires are manifesting and then going away, the new desires are coming, and all these things. So this aspect has to be very, very carefully understood, because this is the starting point for contemplation and understanding of the whole basis and what is called as the wisdom of the Vedanta. The wisdom of the Vedanta begins here with this giving up of identification, loosening the hold of the self. Because I am so and so and I am this, I am that, is also a great attachment and identification. I have formed an image about myself that I have so much experience, so much knowledge, so much wealth, so much of wisdom, or so much of everything which I have acquired over a long period of time. That creates the image which I call as I, or the false self. And we have discussed, when we discussed about the koshas and bodies also, where is this I with so much of identification when it is in deep sleep? When one is in deep sleep, what happened to this identification? Am I aware in that state of my property, of my possessions, of my relationships, of my wife and children, of my identification per se. But the fact of the matter is that during sleep also I am there. I may not be able to be aware of myself in that state, but when you come out of that state, you very well know that you had a nice sleep, and in this sleep, while sleeping also, when there has been absolutely no identification with anything, but still there is something which is life and consciousness has persisted and continues to be there even without this identification. So we have to come to that very carefully. So constantly we should bear in mind at the background of it that all the things with which I identify myself are not the true self. There is something beyond this. We may not be able to identify at this point of time, but we have an intuitive sensing, a feeling. One can know that no, I'm not the body alone. I'm not the mind alone. I'm not the feelings and thoughts alone. I'm not all the experiences which I acquired. Am I a conglomeration or a bundle of all these things? No. There is something beyond this. Very beautifully, in the Viveka Chudamani, he says, Asti Kaschit. There is something beyond this. Beyond the three states of consciousness. Beyond these five bodies. Panchakosha Vilakshanaha. Which is beyond the Avasthatraya. There is something. What is that something? We have to come to it. That is a matter of a direct experience, aparokshanubhuti. It's a matter of direct experience, and we can come to it provided we drop these false identifications. That is the important thing to be remembered here. That is what he is trying to make out a case where he says that I am the body, I am my body, my pranas, my mind, my intellect, my knowledge. They do not make me. They do not really constitute what I call myself as the me part of it. So that cannot be called as the Atma or the true self. But this, as I said, again, I am trying to emphasize on this very much because this contemplation is the starting point. This is this basic fundamental starting point of loosening the hold of the self or this false I and this sense of identification, the dropping of the sense of identification. Jiddu Krishnamurti used to go to the extent of calling himself in the third person. Very rarely he would say I or me or mine. He would say K. He would refer to himself as K. That is the state of being for him. Because calling something as I or me or mine is a false identification. So this whole structure of the spiritual knowledge is based on this factor, getting rid of this false identification. This is where we should start our practice. We should start our practice. I think you remember there was an interesting story. There's an interesting story about a great saint who came from the Himalayas to a kingdom. And the king was a very pious man. He invites him to his palace. And then he says, you are a great saint who have been in the Himalayas for years. Can you impart some of your wisdom? So this sage, who was only wearing a loincloth, goes on giving discourses on this self and continuously enlightening the king. Now suddenly it so happens that there is some transformation in the king, but one evening there's a huge fire in the palace, king's palace, and everybody rushes outside. And the king is undisturbed because of the wisdom that was imparted to him. The king is totally undisturbed, and his people are trying to attend to the fire and putting off the fire and all that. But the saint who came from the Himalayas, standing here, was going on shouting and saying, "The palace is burning, the palace is burning." And then the king maybe observes for some time, but suddenly then he says, "Why this fellow is going on shouting? It's after all, technically it is my palace." Then he says to the saint, "See, why are you so much worried about it? I'm not worried about it. Though technically it belongs to me, you have given me so much of enlightenment. And I am not disturbed. Why is it that you are disturbed?" Then this fellow says, "No, no, you have forgotten the fact there are two of my loincloths are burning there inside. They are inside the palace." So any amount of discourse, any amount of this external knowledge of renunciation and this false identification is not going to help. Even if you have one or two loincloths, you may get attached to the loincloths also. So it need not necessarily be a small thing or a big thing. Anything and everything can be a form of attachment. Do we see that? Do we see that? Because I have come across, some people have come and told me, "Sir, somebody told me when I retired that don't give your retirement benefits to your children. Otherwise, they may kick you out, take your money and kick you out." I said, if you are so much worried about it, it can happen in different forms. Why should you give it? They may grab it, or they may do something else. Or if they are so cruel, they may say, try to see that you are finished off and everything comes to them. So don't get into that kind of notion that people are not going to care for me. What should I do when I become old? What should I do when I am left with nothing? The fact of the matter is, we do not believe in that great cosmic force, that cosmic energy that is operating, that takes care of things in manifestation. In other words, if I truly believe in God, He is the one who will take care of you, not your children and grandchildren and your wife and husband and not all these people, not your property, not your possessions, not your pension or your retirement benefits. They are not going to help you. Let's not hold on to them. You be practical to the extent possible, but that should not be the main concern in your life. Sir, I am now old. What should I do? What, nothing. Why should you do anything? Why don't you simply walk out? Take a long walk from Bangalore to Kashi. Let us see what happens. Nothing will happen. The whole problem is that we are stuck with these ideas of protecting the false identification. The body is a false identification. Keep it in good condition, but don't be under the impression that if something happens, if I don't prolong the misery of suffering due to disease. We did not prolong our suffering. For every small thing, running to a doctor, rushing to somebody, finding out what is happening, and then getting admitted in a hospital. All these things also fall into the same category of identification. So it's not so easy to get rid of this identification with which we have been living for decades and decades, maybe 50, 60, 70, 80 years. I'm living with this identification. How do I give it up? It's not so easy. Unless you start now and here to get rid of this identification, drop this identification. Nothing is going to happen. Let us face anything, let anything come. I'm not advocating adventurism or foolishness or something like that. I'm trying to say that we are not open to life. We are not open to life. When we are not open to life, how can you actually see the beauty and the vastness of it, which is what the whole creation is, the whole cosmic, what you call as God or nirvana or kaivalya or moksha or liberation or freedom is precisely that. Is precisely that. The very giving up of this identification is going to liberate us from this falseness of things. And I'm again, at the cost of repetition, I'm saying this has to be the starting point for anyone and everyone. If we have not started it, let us start it now. Here, take a firm resolution that I am going to keep it in the background of my mind, in my consciousness always, that I am none of these things and none of these things really matter. Otherwise, they will not leave us even after we shed the body, even after we give up this body, which is called as death. They will not leave us. They'll continue to be with us. And that is the reason why we come again and again and again and again. Punarapi maranam, punarapi jananam, punarapi janani, jathare shayanam. We'll continue to come back into this world because we have not given up. We have not given up. So that is what I want to emphasize from the point of view of treading the spiritual path. Can you just hold on for a minute, please? I'll mute. So this has to be the starting point. It is not a question of mere knowledge about these things. Let us be very clear. If it is only knowledge, we'll get attached to the loincloths also. It has to become a part of our being. It should be in every cell of our body, in every part of our mind, every part, everything in the consciousness should be occupied by this fundamental notion of false identification, seeing the false as the false, seeing this false identification, then only we'll make some progress. Otherwise, we'll be stuck here only. Nothing much is going to happen here. Even if 10th Tattva Bodhas and 20 Vivek Chudamanis are not going to really help us. Okay? Then he comes to the point. The earlier one slide, he has referred to saying that Atma na bhavati. This is not Atma. This won't make you what the Atma is. Then the question, fundamental question arises, Atma tarhikaha. Then what is this Atman? You have said that all these bodies, all these sheets, all these koshas, and they are not the body, they are not the Atman. Then what is the Atman? Very succinctly, he says, Satchidananda Swarupaha. Atman is of the nature of Sat, Chit, and Ananda. Swarupa, Rupa means form. Swarupa means essential form or essential nature. Rupa refers to the form. Swarupa refers to the innate nature or innate essential aspect of the Atman is Sat, Chit, and Ananda. Then the question arises, Sat Kim? What is Sat? And again, a very beautiful, simple definition is given. Kalatrayepi tishtati iti Sat. Sat is that which remains unchanged in the three periods of time, past, present, and future. It is something which is changeless with respect to time, is called as Sat, or pure being or pure existence. Then the question, Chit Kim? What is Chit? Jnana Swarupaha. It is of the nature of absolute consciousness. Anandaha kaha. What is Ananda then? He says of the nature of absolute happiness. Unfortunately, I'm not very happy with the term Sukha Swarupaha, but the term Sukha Swarupaha is used here. There's a difference between Sukha and Ananda. Sukha refers to pleasure. If we try to translate into English, Sukha refers to pleasure, which is more concerned with the senses, including the mind. But Ananda is something beyond that. But because he wanted to define it, he is defining that the essential nature of what is called as happiness is in other terms referred to as Anandaha. In this way, evam Satchidananda Swarupam Swatmanam Vijaniya. Thus is to be known the true nature of the self or Atman to be absolute existence, consciousness, and bliss. Now, as I said, the Tattva Bodha is a preliminary text, number one, and it is giving you and me the basic definitions. This is not the complete thing. Let us not assume that this is complete in itself. Here we are only being given very basic definitions. These need to be elaborated and they need to be experienced to understand the depth of it. For example, when he says Sat is Kalatrayepi Tishtati iti Sat, that means that which remains unchanged in the three periods of time. That means he's talking about a timeless dimension. This is something which does not change with time. Now, we have seen earlier, and in our earlier discussions also, we have seen that everything changes. Everything which our senses and mind can perceive, constantly we see that there is a change. They don't remain the same. Now, he is positing a statement by saying that there is something which is changeless. And that is called as Sat. For our present purposes, that is enough. We need not, we can go into it at a deeper level at a different point of time. But understand that that which is changeless, Avyaya, is Sat. That means there is an existence beyond all this manifestation in one way, which is of the essence of existence itself. That is the Sat aspect of it. Now, what is the Chit aspect of it? Chit refers to consciousness. Here, Chit is again one of the three aspects of Atman. Being, or what is called as existence, or Sat is one primary aspect of it. Chit, or being awareness, or what we call as consciousness. Here, it is not consciousness of something. That is a derivative aspect of it. Generally, when we talk about consciousness, consciousness comes into being only when it is conscious of something. That is true. That fact, logically that is true. How can I be conscious unless it is being conscious of something? This is a way of putting things from the Western psychology point of view. But the Indian system, the ancient Sanatana Dharma has gone beyond this aspect of being conscious of something, and they said there is something called essentially consciousness. And all other things are derived, all other aspects of consciousness are derived from it, and that is called as Chit. What the Western psychology is talking about is referred to in the ancient Indian scriptures as the Chitta. Chitta is the medium of consciousness. It makes the person aware of things. But beyond this, there is something called as pure consciousness or absolute consciousness, is referring to that. Similarly, there is something called as pure or absolute bliss. And you have to recognize this fact, and this is what is to be known, that the true nature of the self or Atman to be Sat Chit Ananda Swarupam. This is what is to be known. This is only, again, as I told you, is an explanation. We really do not know what is the essential, absolute nature of Sat, Chit and Ananda. It's only an explanation that is being given to us. Understand that we are stuck in the mental consciousness and we are talking from that level about something beyond the mind. Therefore, it is not something which is amenable to us for direct experience as of now in the state of consciousness in which we are. So let us not get into further discussion and debate or argumentation or trying to mentally grasp this concept of Satchidananda Swarupa at this point of time. How do I understand? How do I understand? How should I know this? What is Sat? What is Chit? What is Ananda? You have said like this. In some other book, it is given in some other form. Somewhere else, that is, whichever book gives in whichever form, whoever it may be, it doesn't constitute experience. It doesn't constitute direct perception. So when something cannot be directly perceived nor grasped by the mind, it is important to make the mind still. It is important not to allow the mind to interfere in this process seriously. Whatever I have said is only an explanation. And explanation has absolutely no value at all. In fact, if we hold on to this explanation, it's a very dangerous thing. So kindly don't hold on to my words. Don't hold on to these explanations. This is a preliminary text giving you some fundamental definitions of certain things. From here onwards, one needs to travel alone, on his own, into the consciousness, into one's own consciousness. As I said, again, it's a starting point. But intuitively, because we recognize that there is something beyond all these things, which I am identifying myself with that, it is important for the mind to grasp, and unless there is a name and a form and a definition in some way or the other, it cannot really understand. So this is only I am trying to give you a mental picture of something which cannot be actually brought down to the level of the mind. One has to ascend to it. It will not descend. One has to ascend to that state of consciousness, which is Satchidananda. So we leave it at this because, as I said, let's not grapple too much with the mind to understand this, because that's not possible at all. Because the mind is not the right instrument. Mind is not the right instrument at all. Okay? Then we will go to the next one. What is the time? It's 12:30. Maybe in another 10 minutes. I'd like to stop. I'll not go much deeper into some things. Now he comes to another dimension of it. Okay. Atha chaturvimshati tatvotpatti prakaram vakshyamaha brahmashraya satvarajastamo gunatmika maya asti. He is now bringing a new concept into the whole discussion. Now we shall explain the evolution of the 24 tattvas. Depending on Brahman for its existence is Maya, which is of the nature of the three gunas, Sattva, Rajas and Tamas. Now, primarily he is saying there are 24 tattvas, or 24 essential elements. What are those 24 essential elements? We'll come to it later. I'm going to tell you how they have come about. Utpatti prakaram vakshyamaha. Now we shall explain the evolution of these 24 tattvas, which is further down, he'll tell you. But he has introduced this concept of Maya. And what is this Maya? Brahmashraya. It is something which is under the supervision or under the control and guidance, and for its very existence, it needs to be based on something which is again referred to as Brahma. As I said, Brahman is also a symbol. Brahman is only a word. It symbolizes something very, very deep. Very, very deep, which is totally beyond the mind and beyond the everything that is in manifestation. So it's a symbol. Let us hold it as a symbol for the time being. Now, Maya is dependent on that symbol, which is called as Brahman, and is of the nature of the three gunas, Sattva, Rajas and Tamas. He is talking about three gunas. They are named as Sattva, Rajas and Tamas. Maya comes from the word called Ma, which means measurement. Anything which is measurable in any form has a limitation. So the beginning point for manifestation is limitation. The whole of manifestation, however big it may be, it is still a limitation in operation. Something limited is only operating. And what does it mean? It is something measurable or finite by nature. That is the essential aspect of it. So Maya as a term we have to understand to mean something which is measurable, something which is finite, something which operates in limitation. And its nature of this finite limited thing is again comes into operation through three aspects, or what are referred to as gunas, are qualities which qualify Maya. Maya per se cannot be perceived by us. It can be only understood as limitation or being finite. Now, being finite, it doesn't keep quiet that way. It wants to create something out of this whole process. And for the creation of this whole process of manifestation, it takes assistance from three qualities which are called as sattva, rajas, and tamas. Sattva refers to dynamic equilibrium. Rajas refers to disequilibrium and activity. And tamas is something which is totally dormant or inactive and totally in disorder and inequilibrium. On the one end is the dynamic equilibrium part of it, and on the other end of the spectrum is the inequilibrium, which brings about disorder. And the sattva element is one which is always in dynamic equilibrium, always trying to restore the equilibrium, always trying to bring about what is called as order. There is chaos at one end and cosmos at the other end, and in between is the continuous churning activity, which is always in disequilibrium, and that is what is referred to as the rajas aspect. These are the three qualities. Now, I'll not go much into it now. We'll come to it slightly later. The process of creation. The process of creation is being described now. Because there are those 24 elements which have to be understood for evolution. The evolution of the 24 elements, Utpatti, how they have come about. So from this Maya, which is Trigunatmika, the process starts. From that, Tataha means from there onwards, from that Maya, Akashaha Sambhutaha. Akasha is born. We had a long discussion about Akasha, the Akasha Tattva. I have, in one of the earlier sessions, I have dwelt in depth on this Akasha as a Tattva, which is there only in our system and in no other system across the world. This Akasha Tattva is there. Almost all cultures, all philosophies, all schools of thought, other than the ancient Indian Sanatana Dharma, they recognize only four: earth, water, air, and fire only. Because they have not understood the basis of it at all. The basis of creation was not understood fundamentally, and they could not integrate this and say that there is a fifth element which forms the basis for manifestation. Well, again, let me not dwell too much on the Akasha, but now he is saying from this Maya part of it, which is of the nature of the three gunas, Akashaha Sambhutaha, Akasha has come. From Akasha, Vayu has come, Akashad Vayu. The air has come, Vayu, which pervades the Akasha. Then Vayos Tejaha, from Vayu has come the fire or brilliance, radiance, illumination, light. All these things are included in that aspect of fire or Tejas. They're not calling it as Agni, they're calling it as Tejas. Agni is the physical fire. Tejas is the element, essential element related to fire, which is illumination, heat, light, brilliance, radiance, and all that. And from that, Tejasaha, Apaha. From Tejas comes water. And Adbhyaha, Prithvi. From water comes the earth. That means it is becoming grosser and grosser and grosser. The most subtle element is the Akasha, which one cannot perceive at all in any form. Then the next subtle level is air, which also cannot be perceived, but can be felt through its movement only. That is the Vayu. Then further grosser than the Vayu is the Tejas or the Agni aspect of it. Then from that, more grosser is the water, which can be held in a container, which is liquid in form. From that comes the grossest element, which is called as Prithvi or the earth. This is how the descent has begun. From Maya to the Akasha, Vayu, Tejas, Apaha, and Prithvi. This is the sequence that is defined. There's a logic behind this sequence also. As I said, from the subtle to the gross, it is moving to the grosser levels, starting from the subtlest and the invisible aspect of it, which is the Akasha. Thereupon, the descent of things has started, and at each descent, a new element is born, and that element is what is helpful in the creation of everything we see in manifestation. Everything we see in manifestation is composed of these 5 tattvas, or sometimes called as bhutas, pancha mahabhutas: Prithvi, apas, tejo, vayu, akasha. Prithvyap, tejo, vayu, akasha are the 5 elements, or pancha mahabhutas they are referred to, and that's how this has come about. I think I'll stop here, because next, if I go into the next slide, it will be again further about the how they have come from the sattva aspect of it. We can take it up next week. So we can go into, if some questions are there, we can go into that. We can.
Mr. Paniji,
yeah.
We're getting that the chat function has been disabled for the attendees. If you are.
No, if somebody can ask a question. I don't know whether it has been disabled for everybody.
Okay.
They can ask a question, isn't it?
Yes, everybody can ask their questions.
Unmute and ask. You can unmute and ask, no problem. I don't know. I think Ravi ji, he has disabled the chat function also.
Daddy.
Okay. Yeah, please.
I have not disabled. I have not disabled.
But then why people are not able to write in chat?
Oh, one chat also has come here. Somebody wanted to.
Not able to see anything in chat here. What is that? Can you read it to me?
So that was somebody wanted to add their name. I mean their number. That's all.
Oh,
nothing
okay.
else.
No. Then I don't know. Maybe nobody has put anything in chat. Possibly that also could be a possibility. But if there are any questions, they can ask the question, or even now put it on chat so that we can discuss. We have another 15 minutes to go.
Come down, sir. Mr. Paniji, it says the presenter has disabled the chat function for attendees.
Oh, I see. I don't know.
When we are doing the chat.
I didn't do it because I don't know how to do it also. Possibly something that has been figured that way.
I'll go on the chat. There you go. It's so scary.
It's not.
Yeah, are you able to enable the chat function, Ravi?
I don't think so. I have done anything.
Maybe it goes automatically into that kind of thing.
Someone has disabled it because it doesn't go automatically.
Oh, I see. I don't know. Because anyway, I'm not the host and I can't do it. Chat function is working now. Somebody has put, from Mr. Sarangi. Yes. Yeah, chat function I think is functioning now. Any questions as such? Anybody would like to raise any question or any point for discussion? Yes, sir. No? Janakiramji?
See, it's all muted. Everything is muted. No mic, I cannot put
Yeah, I'm able to hear you.
chat. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm able to hear you.
Okay, if you are able to hear me,
Yeah.
then I will ask one question about the space.
Yes.
What is the importance of space? And given the fact that all teachings are originated from one source, source has some meaning and reason behind in not revealing space to other schools of thinking.
No, see, the point is the term space is not the right translation for Akasha. First of all, let us understand this. The second point which I want to make is Akasha, we will use the term Akasha only. We will not use any other term because there is no
Yeah,
equivalent.
okay, agreed, Akasa.
Right. Akasha is a tattva. The tattva means an essential factor, not something tangible. See, all these tattvas at their own level are not tangible. They become tangible as things descend. That is what is to be understood. As things descend, then only they become tangible and objective. But essentially, it is a factor which is helpful for manifestation. So, Akasha has to be understood as a medium which Maya uses as a starting point for manifestation. That's the only thing that is, because see, the fundamental proposition of the relativity theory is that space and time are also relative. They are not absolute. Space and time are relative. And space or time, both these things are recognized by a sentient being like the human being in juxtaposition to something. See, I see an object here and I see an object somewhere else, and I see that there is some emptiness between these two things. There's one object here and another object here at point A and point B. And in between point A and B, I see that there is something called as emptiness. That is what is called as space from the scientific point of view. That's all. If both these objects are not there, there is no space also. So we should not understand space from a physical aspect of it. It is not something to be grasped physically by us, which is only possible when we have some objects to identify. Then only the idea of space becomes clearer to our mind. Otherwise, space per se is something which is totally intangible and invisible. And there are some attributes to that thing which we are calling it as space. It is what we have if you refer to our earlier discussion, I have mentioned about uniformity. Space is uniform throughout. Similarly, it is something which no object can touch. Everything is in space, but nothing can actually touch space. An object can temporarily occupy some space, but the fundamental nature of space is such that nothing can touch it. and it is uniform in all respects. There is absolutely no difference of one unit of space from another unit of space as such. So this knowledge was not possibly, it's only my conjecture, that they said it may lead to irrelevant and extraneous discussions if we bring this Akasha Tattva into the whole picture. So they said, okay, manifestation, 4 things are visible and 4 things are experienceable, something which you can experience. So let us restrict ourselves to these 4, and that's how they restricted themselves to the 4. Possibly in the esoteric schools of thought that are there, Western esoteric schools of thought, the Blavatsky talks about Egyptian school, but Blavatsky talks about other Kabbalah and other schools of thought and esoteric traditions where this might have been revealed. But generally, at a philosophical level, at a descriptive level, they have been left at only these 4, and the Akasha, they said it's something which we cannot unnecessarily, we cannot deal with it anyway, so leave it aside, and then they focused only on the 4. That's my, limited opinion about it.
Thank you. It is clear now. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. Anybody else?
Yeah, Krishnapani ji, you
Yeah,
said
please.
that Maya, you said
Maya.
Maya is dependent on Brahma or Brahman?
Yeah, Brahman.
Brahman. Oh, all right. Okay. I just wanted to clarify that because Brahma is also part of Maya,
No,
right?
Brahma is also part of Maya. Ishvara is also part of the whole Maya system scheme.
Right.
In the sense,
Right. Yeah.
Ishvara is untouched by Maya, but comes into being because of the ignorance only, because of the limitation only.
Yeah. Got it.
That's what we talked earlier also.
Yes. Yeah. I just wanted a clarity. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah. So any other questions or I don't know. Yes, please.
Can you relate the Panchabhutas with the body, sir? Correlate with the body?
Who is this?
I'm Shivanand, sir.
Yeah, Shivananji. Yeah, what do you want?
Can you correlate the Panchabhutas, the Akasha, air, fire, water, earth, with the body?
To the bodies.
Yes, bodies. How
No,
they
no,
are.
all these bodies have these tattvas in them, but they are at subtler levels. They are not at the grosser levels. They are at the subtler levels. See, as I said, these tattvas have to be understood not as something tangible and gross and physical, which can be directly perceived by our senses and mind, is not the starting point. The starting point is at a much, much subtler level. Therefore, they are referred to as tattvas. And sometimes the correlate factor of the tanmatra is also brought into it. The tattva and the tanmatra are related. For example, Akasha is related to Shabda. Vayu is related to Sparsha. Tejas is related to Rupa. Water or Apas is related to Rasana or taste. And earth is related to Gandha or smell. So that is the correlate factor of these tattvas to the tanmatras. Shabda, Sparsha, Rupa, Rasagandhas are called as the tanmatras, and they are associated with Prithvi, Apas, Teju, Vayu, Akasha. They are in the reverse direction actually. The enumeration is in the reverse direction. Prithvi is connected to Gandha, as I said. So that correlation is established, and as the consciousness descends from one plane to another, from one plane to another and another plane to another, then the associated material of that plane will have the corresponding Panchamahabhutas with which the material of that plane is created. Am I making myself clear? See, the material at different on different planes is different. On the earth, the grossest level in which our bodies exist, this is the grossest level. And here we are able to see or perceive the material through our senses. And these five Panchamahabhutas form the body at this level. At a subtler level, the Panchamahabhutas operate as the manifestation of material of that particular plane. So the material for each plane is different. And on each plane, the way the Panchamahabhutas operates also differs because of the material of the plane. It can go only up to a certain level on that plane. It cannot go to the grossest level. The grossest level is only possible at the earth. So the subtler aspects of these Panchamahabhutas compose the Sukshma Sharira. These more subtler aspects of these Panchamahabhutas cause create what is called as the Karana Sharira. So it is the composition is there, but at a different level and a different subtler level. Where it is subtler than one level, higher level, it will be much more subtler. So the subtler, the very plane of the material of that plane being subtler, it only can descend up to a certain level and operate up to a certain limit only, and within that limitation, it creates a body. So this body's creation is also dependent on the plane on which these bodies operate and the material of that plane. That's all.
Okay.
I hope Shivanandji, is it clear?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay. So please understand that
Yes.
each plane has a material of its own. And any body created at that level is done using the material of that plane. That material of that plane is also composed of the Panchamahabhutas. Not in the form in which we see down here, but in the subtler form. Okay?
Okay, sir. Okay, sir.